Welcome to another episode of Healthcare Conversations, a podcast where we explore healthcare matters together, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Nkele Matsuso. Wendy Green Thompson is our special guest today. A nurse by profession, Wendy holds a master's degree in bioethics and health law. She has extensive experience in clinical research, having worked for different multinational organizations, including CROs and pharma companies. She is currently the Director, Clinical Development Center for a multinational pharma company. Before we start the conversation, I want to make a disclaimer that this chat is based on Wendy's views, not that of her current employer. Wendy, welcome. Thank you very much for making time to have this chat with me. I'm looking forward to learning from you, and I also know our listeners are going to learn a lot about clinical research in our country. Listeners, our topic today is capacity building for clinical research. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you very much, Nkele. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. As a start, can you explain what clinical trials are in real layman's language?
Okay, so clinical trials are research studies, and these are done to evaluate safety and efficacy of new medications and devices in human participants. And what is the purpose of doing clinical trials in any country, okay? So we investigate new treatments or therapies for various diseases or conditions, or to look at improving treatments or therapies, compare new treatments to existing ones, understand disease mechanisms and progressions, and also to get new scientific data, because we are evolving and we always need new scientific data because our diseases are becoming more complex and we will need new therapies or interventions for those. And clinical trials are run across 4 phases, namely phase 1 to 4. However, in South Africa, we predominantly do phases 2 and 3, and the other phases are done, but on a very small scale.
So why is South Africa focusing on phase 2 and 3 and not focusing on phase 4? And what is phase 4 all about?
So you have to focus on phase 2 and 3 firstly, because it's a phase, these are unregistered compounds. Phase 4 is when you have registered the new drug on the market. So phase 2 and 3 are looking at safety, efficacy, dose. You want to get the right dose, and you want to make sure that that dose is stable for that specific therapeutic area, and you want to make sure that it's safe and it works. And only then, once that is all done and you have all the information, then you can progress to phase 4 once you've registered your compound. So it's phase 4 studies are normally called post-marketing studies. You can't do it's the other way around. It has to go in succession.
So phase 4 would be for products that we've started using. That's what my
Phase 4 is for products that we've started using. And just to clarify, so every medication that you take has gone through clinical trials.
Yes.
So whether it's Panado, basic Panado that everybody knows about, or very complex medications that you would have, say, for hypertension or for cancer, every single medication that you take has to go through clinical trials to make sure that it's safe.
That's good. It's good to hear that, when we put our trust in medication, it has been tested before we can have it.
Absolutely.
Okay. What is your perspective on current state of clinical research capacity in South Africa? How well do you think the country is positioned in terms of growth?
Nkele, I think we can significantly increase our clinical trial capacity across the country. And this really needs concrete effort from all stakeholders in the space. So with regards to the positioning for growth, I think we're quite well positioned. We have globally recognized scientists and key opinion leaders that are well respected. We also have a very rigorous process for approval of clinical trials. So we have SAHPRA, and SAHPRA being the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority, which provides a clear framework for clinical trials, ensuring compliance with local and international standards. We also have very rigorous ethics committees, which safeguard our population.
So then that would be, are those the stakeholders, all the stakeholders in terms of our clinical research capacity?
So the stakeholders are, so in clinical trials, the process is that the pharmaceutical company or the agency has to make sure, firstly, that you have the patient population in the country, okay, to do the clinical trials. Then you have to have the experience in the different therapeutic areas, meaning the doctors that actually conduct these clinical trials. And then you have to have very strong protocols. The protocol is like the blue book of the clinical trial, like the hypothesis you're trying to prove. So that's the protocol. And it will either prove or disprove what I said earlier. So one drug versus another one, or finding a new intervention. So you have the protocol in place, you have your sites in place, you have your doctors in place, and then we have our framework. So SAPRA is actually a regulatory agency that makes sure that, firstly, this drug has been tested somewhere else. We are not the only country participating in it. It is stable, and the doses are correct for the population we're looking at. It's gone through the rigorous processes that you require up until the stage where we're at. And then our ethics committees actually make sure that we have proper processes in place to safeguard our population. So that is the framework of the people that would conduct the clinical trial. So that's the initial stakeholder.
And then the academic, did you mention academic side? Where did the academic sector come in there?
The sites can be both private sites, so doctors that work for themselves or in their private capacity, or doctors that are affiliated to academic centers, so big academic centers. So you have a few of them that are around the country.
Okay. So the academic centers might be like VETs might have their own section, site.
Yes.
For clinical trials.
Yes.
Okay. Depending on what they want to participate in.
Depending on what they want to participate in, correct.
Okay. Okay, great. And how easy is it for all the other health professionals to participate in clinical trials?
Okay, so that's a very good question, Nkeli. And that brings us back to the capacity building, the topic of today's podcast, I think.
Yes.
It's not very easy. Because clinical trials is a specialized field. So according to SAPRA, you need to have the right training to conduct the study. And we also have another guideline called Good Clinical Practice. And it's an extensive document that's used globally. And in that document, it stipulates the type of education you have. So you have to be medically trained. You have to have the experience. You have to have the resources to conduct the clinical trial. Bringing it back to South Africa. In South Africa, if you want to conduct clinical trials, we call you a principal investigator. So it's the overarching person that's responsible for the entire process of conducting the clinical trial. And you have to have conducted 2 or more clinical trials in your experience to work independently. Then we have somebody called a sub-investigator that supports the principal investigator. So once you've had 2 or 3 years experience in clinical research, you can become what we call a principal investigator and run a trial independently. At the moment, we do not have adequate sites, clinical research sites across the country. So they're really focused in like big cities like Johannesburg or Cape Town, and also in the region, so Gauteng as a province and in the Western Cape.
I just want to go back to what you just mentioned. You said the principal investigators, you must have conducted 2 clinical trials to be considered a principal investigator.
Yes.
So under what circumstances would you then have conducted a trials for you to then be considered? Does it mean you have to be a sub-investigator?
Yes.
It's those who have worked as sub-investigators, just like a kind of like a promotion. Now you're a sub-investigator, now you're a principal investigator after 2 trials.
Yes. So not a promotion per se, but what it does say is that you've got the experience. For 2+ years and you understand the process, you understand the ecosystem of clinical trials. Thus, you can independently conduct the study now.
I was just saying it's kind of like a promotion. I'm really using layman's language. I thought for my understanding and my listeners' understanding. You
Yes.
start as a sub-investigator.
Yes.
Once you've done 2 clinical trials, then you move on to be principal investigator.
Yes.
Okay, then you can be considered. Okay. So what are the biggest challenges that these people find, the healthcare professionals who want to be clinical investigators? And you also mentioned that most of the sites are based in Gauteng and Western Cape.
Yes.
Okay. What are the biggest challenges that people from other regions in South Africa are faced with to be able to join in?
So I think the biggest challenge they face is training, experience, expertise, and because of these, they need opportunities for mentoring so that they can actually learn about clinical trials. I think people look at clinical trials and they think, oh, this is an easy space to get into. Clinical trials are very admin intensive. They take a lot of your time. They need a lot of dedication and they need a lot of patience. And also clinical trials are audited and inspected. It's a highly regulated environment. So you can be inspected by SAPRA, the FDA, the EMEA, all the international agencies, and you can be audited by the pharmaceutical companies doing the study, and you can be audited by the ethics committees. So your processes must be on point. You must be able to prove every single thing you've done in the study. So they're actually a lot of work.
So this boils down to, I guess, building infrastructure within your practice as a doctor.
Yes.
And what does that infrastructure entail? I can hear from an admin point of view, seems
Yes.
like it's a lot.
Yes.
And in terms of then, do you have to employ people who are capable, who have been GCP trained? What does that entail?
Yes, absolutely correct. So it does involve infrastructure. So first, it involves infrastructure for human resource. So it's not just the investigator and the sub-investigator doing the study. They're also supported by what we call a clinical study coordinator. And this person is like the admin backbone for the site. So they can be health science professionals or they can be other professionals. So these people are really conducting the admin of the study. They will maybe be recruiters that you have in the study to go and find this patient population you're looking for. You may need data capturers because you need to transcribe information from like a paper, so the doctor's medical notes, into electronic systems. So those two work hand in hand. You may need somebody to take your bloods. So you need maybe a nurse who is trained in how to take bloods, depending on how big the study is. And then you need equipment. So clinical trial has all sorts of different equipment required. You need an emergency trolley that is stipulated in case something happens, because this is an unregistered compound and something happens to the patient in your room. So you need an emergency trolley. You need files where you can actually lock up the information because it's proprietary information. You need fridges. And these fridges are different temperature fridges. So you need a fridge maybe 2 to 8 degrees. You need a fridge maybe minus 70 degrees. You need centrifuges where you need to spin down bloods. And all that involves cost. And normally for very new clinical research centers, they do not have these and they actually need to partner. So they either need to partner with the pharmaceutical company to maybe buy or loan the equipment they need for the specific study. So the layout is quite human resource intensive and cost. It can be cost.
It is.
Yes.
It can be heavy. Yeah.
Yes.
So I can imagine when you are a newly qualified doctor or you've just started your practice, that those might be the barriers of participating in clinical trials.
So the first barrier is the exposure to clinical trials. It's the exposure to clinical trials. So you could have all that in place and never conduct a clinical trial. So you won't be able to conduct clinical trials by the mere fact that you have all this equipment in place and all this human resource in place. What we want is the experience in clinical trials. So it's how do we bridge that? How do we get more people exposed to clinical trials across the country?
This episode is sponsored by PSM Personnel. PSM Personnel is specialist recruiters in the pharmaceutical and healthcare industry. Please contact them on info@psmp.co.za. info@psmp.co.za. Now back to our chat. what measures are being put in place by pharma companies, academic institutions, Department of Health, SAPRA, any of these stakeholders? What measures are being put in place to make sure that we expand beyond Western Cape and Gauteng?
So currently, what SAPRA has asked us as pharma is to support their capacity building initiative. Meaning, how do we create the linkages with experienced investigators versus inexperienced investigators? We don't have a formalized process yet. Each company does it separately, and there has been initiatives in place. So, for instance, I know that some companies at the moment have experienced investigators mentoring inexperienced investigators, and it's like a partnership to increase that capacity. I also know that there are some pharmaceutical companies that will take health science graduates and they become like clinical research associates, and that's how they enter the industry. I also know that there are other companies that actually do training in clinical trials and then partner with companies to place these graduates within these companies. But at the moment, there's no formalized process. I think it's a work in progress. It's something that we all have to be intentional about so that we can actually transform the clinical research space and also expose all the patients in South Africa to these innovative medicines, not just in the capital cities or in these, like in the Western Cape that I've made, or in the metros that I've mentioned. We also need to have ethics committees that are fully functional in other regions, allowing the pharma companies or other agencies to do clinical trials in these other regions, because we need ethics committee approvals. So we need fully functioning ethics committees in these other regions as well. And they also need capacity building so that they're fully functioning to support the initiative.
Can I just ask, what is the role of an ethics committee? I know you mentioned approval, but what ethics committee? Who comprises the ethics committee? What kind of qualifications does one need to be in part of the ethics committee, and what do they do in addition to approval?
So the ethics committee is comprised of different health professionals. They will comprise of the people, the expert in that specific therapeutic area. They comprise of lay people. They comprise of religious people. They comprise of community people. I don't know all the different roles off the top of my head.
I'm just
now,
glad to
Gilly.
hear that it's
Yes.
not just the healthcare professionals,
Yes.
it can be different people.
It's different people. So what they look at is that the big thing is they want to make sure that the patients are not being exploited. So we have a document called an informed consent form. In that informed consent form, it explains what the study is about.
It's all about.
It explains how often they're going to come for the visit. It explains the potential side effects, because this is medication and all medication has side effects. It explains the potential discomfort they may experience. It explains, for instance, if they're going to have blood drawn from them, how much is going to be drawn from them. It also tells them where else the study is taking place, in what other countries that the study is taking place. It tells them how long the study is going to take place and what is required of them. What else is in the informed consent? More importantly, it's voluntary.
Yes.
And that they can at any time withdraw their consent. So if they feel that the side effects are too onerous, or if they feel they actually do not want to participate anymore for whatever reason, it's a voluntary process and they can withdraw at any time. So the ethics committees look at that. So they look at the informed consent. They make sure that we've got all the approvals in place from SAPRA or whoever else we want to get accesses for, whether we've got our export permits in place. An export permit is where we're exporting our bloods outside of the country, or any gametes, so any body parts or biopsies that we need to take, highly regulated. So just to reassure our listeners that it's supported by the National Tissue Act. So it's legislated. So that everything that goes out of the country, we track how much, and we track where it's going, and the people participating in the study can actually ask for it to be returned.
To be returned.
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Sure. So we've spoken, I'm glad that you mentioned in terms of the participants as well, because we've been speaking from the healthcare professional side.
Yes.
Now you mentioned the participants. And I just want to talk both now, in a sense that why is it important, how important actually, rather, it is for previously disadvantaged healthcare professionals to participate in clinical trials? Do you see it helping in terms of diversity for of participants as well? How related are the two?
I think they are related, because I think if you are treated by somebody who looks like you, who speaks your language, who understands your background, who understands your culture, there is already a trust.
Okay.
There's a trust relationship. Also, it gets buy-in from the community that these clinical trials are not just done elsewhere, they're also being done in our communities by our people. Thus getting, because it's a trust relationship. I think clinical trials has had a bad reputation in the past, but in South Africa, I think we conduct very good clinical trials. We have very good safeguards to protect our people. So I think if you are conducting clinical trials with somebody you know, more often than not, it's the people have watched this doctor go to varsity and then come back into the community, and they're very proud of that. They now have become a specialist. It's somebody that they can treat. They treated, they've treated their family members in the past. Now they're treating you. So it's a trust thing. So I also think that you can unpack it in somebody's language. It's easier to speak to someone in their own language. And I think in South Africa, we're privileged. The informed consents can also be, it's actually a requirement by the ethics committee that the informed consents are translated into the person's home language.
Oh.
So if you Sesotho speaking, you will get one. If you Xhosa speaking, you will get a Xhosa ICF. If you're Afrikaans speaking, you'll get an Afrikaans ICF. So it's easier for you. You can take it home. Your family can review it. You can come back with questions. You understand the language. There's no barrier of English for you there.
I like what you mentioned in terms of the fact that, you would have seen the doctor grow here and go to varsity, and the doctor comes back.
Yes.
And the doctor now is conducting clinical trials. I think that for me means how important it is then to have clinical trials conducted in rural areas, in all the previously disadvantaged groups must get exposure to clinical trials. And it also makes it important for people, South African population, to be educated on the importance of clinical trials for discovery of medicines and to help people, basically, future generations as well. Yeah. Okay, that's quite interesting. What more can the industry do to build the pipeline for building the diverse investigators, basically private investigators, making sure that we have these healthcare professionals participating?
I think we have to have an intentional transformation agenda that is long-term and that has an impact. So we must be intentional about doing it. We mustn't individually decide, okay, this is what we're going to do. I think as stakeholders, we need to decide this is a gap and how as a collective we need to do it. We also need to measure it. So year on year, how many more sites have we reached in our communities to increase the capacity? Because you don't improve something you don't measure. I also think we must look at what the current barriers are in not getting these communities or these sites to doing clinical trials, and what are the bottlenecks, and how do we unpack that so that we expose more people to clinical trials. I also think, as I said before, we need to strengthen our ethics committees across the country, because we have some very strong ones and we need some that need additional support. I also think that where possible, so all stakeholders must be encouraged to engage academic institutes to develop and include in their teaching curricula clinical research science.
That's a good one, I think. Because I think some of I don't know if that is your experience, some people would finish their BSc in biotechnology or other BSc related to clinical trials and not even know that they can actually be actively involved in clinical research.
Yes. So I think it's something, if it's taught at universities in health science graduate curricula, you're already exposed to it at a university level. So when you qualify, you can decide whether you want to enter the space as the professional or not.
So this boils down to collaboration of all stakeholders, academia,
Absolutely.
pharma
Absolutely.
companies, CROs, current principal investigators, the current sites in the metros, bringing in the sites that are not actively involved or encourage mentoring other doctors.
That's exactly
basically.
what it is to provide opportunities within these institutions for mentoring and training.
For mentoring and training.
Yes.
Oh, wow, that's actually good from where we are to where we can go. There's, like you said in the beginning, that there is still room for growth.
Yes.
You didn't put like that, but basically that's what you said. There is room for growth. Yeah. I guess in closing, thank you for everything that you've said. I have learned in terms of clinical trials, and you broke it down very nicely for us, for me and the listeners. What would you say to healthcare professionals, particularly those who are from previously disadvantaged groups, who are looking to get involved in clinical research but may feel discouraged or face obstacles? What would be your word to them?
My first word would be, don't give up. Okay? Reach out to those companies that you think could potentially assist. Upskill yourself. So attend courses on clinical research. Keep up to date with what's happening in this space. So I think do your own homework first. Then you can reach out. What we do for sites that have no experience, we tell them what type of capacity with regards to infrastructure they will need, so that when the pharma company comes to approach them, they have that in place already, and the linkages are easier to make. And really just to say, don't give up, and all the best. Keep reaching out.
Where can they learn about programs that are available, if there are any programs that are available?
So it's on, Google is a very nice tool. So if you Google, for instance, clinical trial training, a whole lot of companies that are doing it in South Africa pops up. If you do clinical trial learnerships, some pharmaceutical companies do them, and you can find them, or you can phone the different pharmaceutical companies and ask, if you're a health science graduate, if they offer this type of training. I think you have to knock on the doors to find out who's doing what.
Thank you so much, Wendy. But now for our listeners, as you have heard, South Africa is very attractive for clinical trials. Even in the first episode, we learned how important clinical trials are and that we are really ready for clinical trials. We have been doing well in clinical trials. We just need to broaden the base and ensure that our expertise continues to grow. So if you are listening, please contact the healthcare professionals from your township or from your village to inform them of these available opportunities. They must search the internet, as Wendy just mentioned, to never miss out on any of the opportunities that are available. We will also continue to bring updates in the industry as to what is happening in the industry and how can you access these opportunities. Ask your healthcare professionals, family, and friends to subscribe to the podcast as we continue exploring healthcare matters together, one conversation at a time. Thank you.